141. The Test of Professors. On the fourth floor of Hogwarts, in a certain room, a large bored dog lay sprawled out. It had three massive, fierce heads. One turned to look around. Another was closing its eyes, dozing. The wooden door creaked open. Cerberus's three heads lifted in unison and trained on the doorway. Just as it was about to bare its teeth and bark, the dog sniffed the newcomers and thumped its tail instead. When Dumbledore entered with Lucien, all three mouths barked together, and Cerberus trotted over eagerly, pressing its middle head against Lucien as if waiting to be petted. Dumbledore chuckled. "It seems Cerberus takes a liking to you." Lucien reached out and scratched the beast's scalp. "Animals tend to like me," he said, "and now I have the unicorn's blessing as well." He produced 3 roasted lamb legs and tossed them. Each huge mouth caught a leg in midair. Cerberus sat, its 3 heads swaying, devouring the meat with relish. Dumbledore and Lucien arrived at a trapdoor that opened of its own accord. Lucien peered into the darkness below. A faint rustling sounded, like snakes slipping through leaves. It was pitch black, so Lucien quietly activated his peering eye. His vision filled with tangled, dark green vines, devil's snare, coiled together and slowly writhing. When he had last checked that passage, it had been empty. Now it was covered with the strangling plant. Devil's snare had a nasty reputation. It could bind even heavy, powerful creatures like trolls, but it had a glaring weakness. It feared light and fire. Ordinary beasts rarely produced either, but for a wizard it was simple. The Lumos charm was taught in a first-year charms class. Professor Sprout was being considerate. Identify the plant and remember its weakness, and the stage was easily overcome. Lumos, Lucien called. A small ball of light formed at the tip of his wand. It detached, fell through the opening, and then swelled, flooding the pit with bright light. The snake-like strips recoiled, revealing a wide gap. Lucien shifted into his animagus form, becoming an owl, and dropped straight down. As he neared the floor, he unfurled his wings and returned to human shape, landing lightly. The devil's snare gathered and sagged like a cushion. He smiled. The Hufflepuff dean had been thoughtful. "This stage is rather simple, isn't it?" Dumbledore asked, appearing at his shoulder. "Very," Lucien agreed. "If you can identify Devil's Snare and know it hates light and fire, you're through." "A few days ago, Professor Sprout even mentioned it in the revision lecture," Dumbledore said. "It's within the exam scope." They walked down the long corridor to the next room. The sound of wings filled the air. Countless jewel-bright objects twirled about. Lucien peered and realized they were not birds at all, but winged keys, Flitwick's challenge. He studied the heavy door at the far side, noted the keyhole's shape and size, and memorized it. He spotted a fleet of broomsticks in the corner, but didn't bother with them. Transforming into an owl again, he used the superior motion vision of his form to single out a large silver key with sky-blue wings. A few deft swoops later, he had the key in his talons. He returned to human form, unlocked the door, and passed Flitwick's test. Dumbledore gave a soft clap. "Beautiful animagus work," he murmured. The next chamber was suddenly lit as they entered. It was a giant chessboard. Black and white pieces, 2 or 3 meters tall, stood ready. McGonagall's wizard chess. Lucien scanned the arrangement and shook his head. "This would normally require a team," he said. Dumbledore tilted his head. "You sound as if you have another solution." Lucien flicked his wand. "Very simple for black to win. One brutal way is to blast all the white pieces, but..." With a few more taps, the white pieces' surfaces altered. They now looked like black pieces. Or you can simply turn all the white pieces into black ones. That's enough. Only black pieces need remain. Dumbledore's beard-tipped mouth twitched into a smile. McGonagall's pieces were transfigurations of great strength, not easily altered. Little wizards should not be able to layered transfigure them over the original enchantments, but Lucien could. "A solution that goes to the heart of the problem," Dumbledore said, "and you have the skill to match the idea." Before they reached the next door, a familiar stench told Lucien what awaited them. He opened the door and saw the troll, a massive creature, even larger than the one at Christmas. Quirrell must be fond of trolls. Dumbledore remembered Halloween and adjusted his glasses. "Ahem, perhaps we need not attempt the troll stage?" Lucien regarded the trolls with faint regret. The creature's dull gaze seemed to shiver slightly at his expression. These trials were almost too easy. There were ways to make them nastier. Toss some chomping cabbages into the devil's snare, rig traps among the flying keys. As for the troll, why not try some experimental weaving magic? He could already modify magical constructs. Testing on a troll could be instructive. But Quirrell would scout ahead for the students, so it wasn't a pressing concern. They stepped into the following room. As the door shut, purple and black flames shot up behind them and from the opposite portal. In the center of the chamber stood a table with 7 oddly shaped bottles. A parchment lay beside them. Lucien read it aloud. 2 of us can help you. 1 takes you forward, 1 sends you back. 2 are nettle wine. 3 are poison. Clues. Poison is always immediately to the left of wine. The far left and far right bottles contain different things, but neither will take you forward. The bottles are all different sizes, but the largest and the smallest are not the deadly ones. The second from the left and the second from the right do not look alike, but are actually the same. Lucien couldn't help but smirk inwardly. Snape had named his challenge Potions, but it was really a logic puzzle. Devil's Snare relied on Hermione, the flying keys on Harry, the wizard chess on Ron, the troll, well, on Quirrell. This potion stage would come down to Hermione again. A clear division of labor, indeed. 142. School year exams. Holiday. Holiday. The potions classroom smelled faintly of herbs and sweet smoke. 7 oddly shaped bottles sat on the table. Lucien studied them for a moment, then pointed to the smallest. This dwarf potion lets you move forward through that black flame. He tapped the bottle on the far right next. This one sends you back through the purple flame. 1 by 1, he identified the remaining vials, discerning which were poisons and which were safe to drink. Dumbledore clapped softly. Your answers are quick. To be honest, logical reasoning is a skill many wizards lack. There's no need to drink the potions. Professor Snape doesn't brew them lightly. Dumbledore waved his hand and the flames vanished. He then stepped into the last challenge chamber. Lucien, as expected, saw the mirror of Ericid. Taking Fawkes's tail feather from his pocket, Lucien said dryly, You didn't really expect me to follow Harry and the others all the way to this final test, did you, Headmaster? Dumbledore nodded. I will teach you a small piece of magic, a different way to observe. He produced a silver bracelet set with sapphires, slid it on, drew out the Elder Wand, and spoke a long string of spells. Lucien watched as Dumbledore approached the mirror. When the hand wearing the bracelet touched the glass, ripples ran across the surface and Dumbledore disappeared into the reflection. Lucien raised an eyebrow. So that's the small magic. Old Dumbledore did have an inexhaustible supply of tricks. The bracelet was an alchemical aid enhanced by complex charms, another neat thing to add to his list of techniques. Hogwarts' library was a treasure trove he intended to explore. Dumbledore himself was a walking compendium. After the demonstration, Dumbledore stepped back out of the mirror and began to teach Lucien the method. Exam week had officially begun. The year-end tests proceeded on schedule. Each student used a unified, exam-specific quill enchanted to prevent cheating. Phew, not nervous, not nervous. Ron kept whispering to himself before he entered the exam room. Lucien patted his shoulder. It's all right. You all did well on the practice test I set. The year-end exam is just another test. Act normally. Ron relaxed a little. Between Lucien's assignments, weekly quizzes, monthly tests, and that recent practice final, his exam nerves had curiously lessened. There were also practical exams to get through. In Charms, Professor Flitwick demanded that pineapples be made to tap dance across desks. Full marks required a pineapple to complete a full tap routine. Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration exam asked them to turn mice into snuff boxes, with marks depending on the workmanship. Lucien Grafton. McGonagall's voice called him in, and he walked into the examination room. She gave a small, bemused smile. This shouldn't be difficult for you, but Dumbledore hinted you might give me a surprise. Lucien's so-called surprise was short and authoritative. The handsome young man vanished, and in his place, an ordinary owl with slightly spread wings sat on the stool. McGonagall's hand froze on her marking slate. Her expression registered both astonishment and a flash of professional concern. Only Dumbledore had known Lucien was an animagus. After some thought, Lucien had decided to register the form with the Ministry of Magic over the summer. It was safer to make it official. If the ministry discovered an unregistered animagus, consequences could be severe, expulsion from Hogwarts and worse. He wasn't ready for that. There were still too many books to read, experiments to conduct. The summer would be busy, observing dragons at a dragon farm, helping Newt with releasing Thunderbirds in North America, accompanying Dumbledore to the ministry, and of course, visiting the Weasleys. For now, he reverted to his human form, accepted the perfect score without fuss, and left the room. As the next examinee went in, Lucien joined Harry and the others. From inside the exam hall came a sharp, exasperated voice. "Seamus Finnegan!" It was McGonagall, half anger, half exasperation. A few minutes later, Seamus emerged, rubbing his eyes, looking miserable. Harry's questions and Seamus's hiccuped explanations made the situation clear enough. Seamus had blown up the mouse. The explosion had been enough to cover the whole classroom in debris. They moved on. Potions required brewing a forgetfulness potion. The potion itself wasn't especially difficult if one could ignore Snape's watchful, disdainful presence. A few students, so nervous they couldn't resist, tasted what they were brewing to test the effect. If Snape hadn't intervened, one unlucky pupil might have drunk the whole cauldron. The final paper was History of Magic, largely facts and names, which ancient wizard invented the self-stirring cauldron, and so on. Once it was done, everyone would be free, at least until the results were posted. After a long semester, a week of relative freedom, before summer vacation felt like a holiday. "I think this was even easier than the tests you gave us, Lucien," Ron said with a grin as he emerged. Hermione, however, was quietly comparing answers with Lucien, fretting over a small mistake she'd spotted. Harry stood apart, his hand pressed to his forehead, the lightning scar throbbing with a hot, familiar pain. 143. Quirrell's adventure begins. By the Black Lake, a giant squid lay in the shallows, enjoying a warm sunbath. The Weasley twins and Lee Jordan were poking at its tentacles, but it merely swayed lazily and ignored the bold students. Harry, passing by, had no thought of joining them. He rubbed his forehead, trying in vain to ease the pain from his scar. "Harry, don't worry so much about the exam results. Lucien taught us so much. We'll pass, no problem," Ron said, trying to comfort him. Harry only shook his head. "No, I'm thinking about the Philosopher's Stone." A large flock of owls swept toward the castle, envelopes and parcels clutched in their beaks. Harry looked up, guessing they were letters from parents arranging holiday details. He wasn't sure whether his aunt and uncle would write. Hagrid, he knew, wrote to him the most. "Hagrid! Dragon egg!" he blurted. A sudden flash of memory came through the pain. He leaped up and ran for the gamekeeper's hut, Ron and Hermione trailing after him. Slow down, slow down. What are you rushing off to do?" Ron panted. Harry explained as they ran. "The dragon egg. Hagrid got one. Why would someone give Hagrid a dragon egg now? It's too much of a coincidence." They reached the hut and found Hagrid sitting outside, blowing on a flute slightly out of tune. After speaking with Hagrid, Harry realized someone had already found a way past Fluffy. The Philosopher's Stone was in danger. "I need to find Dumbledore," he said. "Ron, Hermione, one of you go find Lucien and tell him what's happened. We need his help." He set off before they could argue. Late that night, the castle had quieted. With the exams over and Dumbledore away in London on urgent ministry business, this was the most relaxed night Hogwarts had seen in weeks. Quirrell knew it was his chance. Wrapped in a purple robe and a long headscarf, he moved silently through dim corridors, urged on by the soft, relentless whisper in his mind. Since encountering Lord Voldemort in the dark forests of Albania, Quirrell had been driven by a single purpose. He had spent months and a great deal of effort learning the protections around the stone, the three-headed dog, the devil's snare, the puzzles set by the professors. Tonight he would act, seize the stone, and, when the time came, allow the fragment of power within him to be restored. He closed his eyes, breathed, and reminded himself there was no turning back. At the fourth-floor corridor, he stopped in front of the dilapidated wooden door. He produced a small harp from his robes, plucked at it with his wand, and watched it grow larger. Its strings began to pluck themselves, producing a soft, enchanting melody. He had expected a fierce guardian to be the hardest obstacle, and yet music was enough. Fluffy's heavy breathing slowed, then ceased altogether. Quirrell thought bitterly of Hagrid, The giant had been led astray all too easily by drink and tales. If only he hadn't wasted savings on a dragon egg to extract information, he would have smiled. When he heard distinct snoring from inside the room, he opened the door. The three-headed dog lay across the trapdoor, heads lolling, drooling and snoring loudly. Quirrell tossed the harp into a corner, waved his wand and pushed the creature aside to reveal the trapdoor. He lifted it and saw the writhing vines below, the Devil's Snare, Professor Sprout's contribution. Quirrell made no hesitation. He jumped. The Devil's Snare closed around him, soft and deceptively comforting. He used it as a cushion and landed on the tangle below. Only then did he cast Lumos. Light flared and the vines unsnarled, releasing him with a thud. The sound of hard objects clattering reached his ears. Something else was falling into the chamber with him. He raised his wand and peered. Smooth, yellowish-green heads like cabbages littered the floor, and as the Devil's Snare contracted, more dropped from above. At first, Quirrell blinked. His notes had not mentioned cabbages. Then he saw fine cracks appearing on their skins, and 2 rows of pitch-black teeth gleamed hungrily. As a Ravenclaw alumnus, he knew his herbology well. These were not ordinary cabbages. These were Chinese chomping cabbages, biting cabbages, and they were waking up. He slammed up a shield, but in his haste it was thin. One of the cabbages lunged and tore through the barrier, biting clean through sleeve and flesh. Pain flared as the creature gnawed his left hand. Cloth and a chunk of skin were ripped away. "Blast it! Always my left hand," he muttered through the sting, yanking his arm back. He flicked his wand, lighting spell after lighting spell, then switched to repeated fire charms, the quickest, most reliable counter to chomping cabbages. The flames seared the heads, and the cabbages blackened and collapsed. The magic worked, but the more the fires burned, the faster the Devil's Snare above contracted, and the more cabbages it shed. For each one he incinerated, another thudded down. After a frantic, painful few minutes, Quirrell had cleared the chamber, but not without cost. His left hand was bleeding, his right calf had been chewed, and his robes hung in tatters. He limped out of the room into the corridor beyond. "How did Professor Sprout come to hide chomping cabbages under the Devil's Snare?" he rasped, breath heavy. The whisper answered inside his head, soothing and hungry. "Don't mind the pain. The Philosopher's Stone is close at hand. When I am resurrected, it will be easy to restore your health." Quirrell gripped his wand until his knuckles whitened. The voice steadied him. He forced his pace toward the next chamber. "Next is Professor Flitwick's test," he told himself. "He was my dean once. I know how he thinks." He felt a small rush of confidence, and under the fever of fear and hope, the whisper curled around him once more like a promise. "My colleagues are all trying to trick me." Quirrell thought as they reached the room full of flying keys. He breathed a huge sigh of relief when he saw the small keys with tiny wings. It's exactly as Professor Flitwick said. He knew his dean, kind, a man who'd even had tea and tiny dancing cakes with Quirrell back when he was a student. Grabbing a broom at random, Quirrell mounted it and set off, scanning the swarm for a key whose shape matched the keyhole on the door. He soon spotted a silver key with sky-blue wings. He was no Quidditch star, but his flying was competent, and after a few maneuvers, he snatched the key out of the air. Just as he was about to land and open the door, the key spoke. "Excuse me, who was the Goblin general who started the war during the Goblin Rebellion of 1612? Quirrell stared. A little mouth had formed on the key's handle, and a voice, threaded with the grinding whir of gears, came from it. "What?" He was sure Professor Flitwick hadn't mentioned answering questions as part of the test. He steeled himself and called up the answer from memory. 3, 2. The key began counting down. Quirrell scrambled through his history of magic. 1. Bang! Blue-white, icy mist burst from the key and splattered across Quirrell's face. When it cleared, the key in his hand had vanished. He wiped his face hard, certain this must be one of Flitwick's tricks. "Don't dally. Find the right key." Lord Voldemort's faintly irritated voice urged him, and Quirrell did not linger. He forced himself to remember the Goblin General, then launched back into the room. He seized another key, the sky-blue winged one again, this time determined to answer whatever it asked. The new question came. "Excuse me, what do Peruvian viper-toothed dragons like to eat?" Quirrell frowned. No, the question changed. He hadn't grabbed the wrong key. The little mouth counted down again. 3, 2. Wait! Bang! The icy mist hit him again. Anger burned hot. So it changes, does it? Do you think I can't answer? He snapped, ready to prove himself. Do you know what a top student from Ravenclaw is capable of? Without waiting for Voldemort's prodding, Quirrell darted for the sky-blue key once more. This time, he didn't dwell on the earlier questions. He focused on catching and preparing for whatever would come next. He managed to capture it cleanly and waited. The key asked, "Excuse me, what do you get when you mix powdered moonstone and hippogriff blood?" 3, 2. Air tightening fluid, used to brew a potion for breathing underwater, Quirrell answered promptly. The little mouth closed with satisfaction. So it's not that hard, after all. Quirrell smiled. Flitwick's tests did have that very Ravenclaw characteristic. Clever, precise. He slid the key into the door's keyhole and turned it, but the key would not turn. He tried again, more forcefully. Nothing. Confusion creased his brow. That should be right. Before he could puzzle it out, a louder voice, also threaded with the grinding sound of gears, came from the door itself. A huge mouth had opened in the wood, and a brass-colored eye flipped out like a mechanical iris to fix him in its gaze. Suppose you come to a crossroads. One path leads to the village of honesty, where the villagers always tell the truth, and the other leads to the village of lies, where they always lie. A villager stands at the crossroads. You may ask him one question. What should you ask to find the path to the village of honesty? Quirrell's mind raced. He had practiced riddles like this as a boy, but time was ticking. The mechanism counted down. 3, 2. He reached, grasping for the right formulation. 1. Idiot. The huge mouth spat cold water laced with ice shards straight at him. He sneezed and then sneezed again. Ah! Ah! He had been humiliated, and Ravenclaw's competitive streak snapped. Quirrell roared, his eyes bright with fury and determination. He forced himself to think faster, to answer under pressure, to outwit the door, as he always had with the bronze diadems of his youth. In the end, he proved, to himself at least, that the Sorting Hat had been right to put him in Ravenclaw. When he left the room, the little mouth on the key and the huge mouth and eye on the door closed and vanished as if they had never existed. He moved on to the next chamber and found the giant chessboard and the enormous wizard's chess pieces. He knew the trick here usually required several people making sacrificial moves, but this was something he could handle with transfiguration. If I can turn the white pieces into black pieces, he muttered, tapping his wand and aiming casually at a pawn. He waited. 1 second, 2, 3. The piece remained unchanged. Fool, Lord Voldemort's voice said, approving the insight. They've already been enchanted with dozens of transfiguration layers. Quirrell listened, humbled. McGonagall had been an authority even when he was a student. Now his respect for her craft deepened. Then destroy them, Voldemort suggested. Ordinary magic won't pierce them. They've been solidified with strong defensive transfigurations, alchemical measures. Use the dark arts I taught you, quickly. Obedience to the voice was absolute. Gritting his teeth, Quirrell tore a ragged scrap of flesh from the already injured left arm and hurled it onto the chessboard. He raised his wand and uttered a low, guttural incantation. He had been taught for such things. The spell built and let loose. Boom! A violent explosion blew the enchanted pieces to rubble. Meanwhile, in Gryffindor Tower, Harry had gathered Ron and Hermione, intent on slipping out of the common room. "You're not going out again," a voice said from the corner. Neville stepped out from behind an armchair, expression resolute. "You'll get Gryffindor in trouble if you're caught," Neville announced. "I have to stop you." He balled his chubby fists. "Come on then, let's have it." "We really have an emergency, Neville. Move aside," Hermione protested. "I won't," Neville said stubbornly. Hermione closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, raised her wand, and said quietly, "I'm very sorry, Neville." "Petrificus totalis." Neville's arms slapped down to his sides, and he went rigid, then collapsed in a stiff heap. The three friends hurried out of the common room. "Dumbledore isn't here, and we still haven't found Lucien," Ron murmured as they ran. "We're the only ones who can protect the Philosopher's Stone now." Harry cut him off. "And Lucien taught us some defense against the dark arts. We can handle it." Back in the depths of the castle, after Quirrell had sacrificed the piece of his flesh, The enchanted chessmen shattered. Quirrell passed through the room without watching them slowly stitch themselves back together. He had planned the next challenge himself. A troll, simple, blunt, and controllable. He had even hidden a destructive curse in the troll's head. With a flick of his wand, he could make it explode. He muttered a bubblehead charm over his nose and mouth to keep out the nauseating stench, kicked the door open, and raised his wand for a quick fight. A strange howl echoed from within the darkness. Something moved, emerging slowly. Quirrell's eyes narrowed, his wand almost slipped from his fingers. "What is that?" he blurted. "Where's my troll?" A different voice called out. 145. Where have the trolls gone? What do you see in the mirror of Erised? Thump, thump, thump. Deep in the chamber before Professor Quirrell, the vast shadow seemed to grow heavier. Heavy footsteps followed, and something strange unfolded out of the darkness in the corner. It was humanoid, but with arms and legs unnaturally long. Its forearms nearly brushed the floor. Its body was like a moving fortress, nearly 7 or 8 meters tall. Thick plates of ice armored its greenish-gray skin, faint blue light leaking from the cracks. Twisted crystalline horns on its head caught the dim light, and its blood-red eyes fixed on Quirrell. The wand in his hand trembled. "No, it's impossible," he whispered hoarsely, voice shaking with shock and fear. An ordinary troll stood around 4 meters. The one he had stationed at the checkpoint had been a bit larger, but certainly not past 5. This creature exceeded that by far, on a par with the largest pure-blood giants. Trolls could not use magic. They fought with brutal strength alone. But this thing was sheathed in hideous ice armor, frost spilling from its movements. Quirrell fumbled to trigger the wards and devices he had prepared. A faint wisp of green smoke sighed from the back of the tall creature's head. Quirrell's pupils pinched. That feedback meant this was the troll he'd placed at the checkpoint. But why had the curse weakened like this? Had someone tampered with my dark arts? The creature, apparently angered though not seriously wounded, cracked its neck, then started to run in a few enormous strides. Ice condensed in its massive hand and formed a thick, spiked club. Quirrell flinched to retreat. With a mechanical click, the door behind him shut. He lunged sideways as the blue, barbed club came down, the cold it carried biting the air. It smashed near his turban with a thunderous crash. Quirrell was preparing to create distance and strike with magic when a sudden, searing pain shot through his back and the back of his thigh. From where the club had hit the floor, a spray of long ice spikes erupted. 2 of them impaled his back and his right leg. Useless. A voice colder than ice filled his mind. Quirrell felt control slip from him again. His flesh seemed to thin, his body a more and more pitiable thing. Madness and a sinister power erupted within him. "The magic is here. Finish it quickly." The voice faded, saving strength for the final checkpoint. Lord Voldemort did not know what tricks Dumbledore had prepared. "Thanks to you, Hermione, for spotting the devil's snare in time." Harry wiped sweat from his brow. "Professor Sprout went over it in herbology a little while ago." Hermione snuffed the flame at her wand's tip with a flick. "All right, let's move." They pushed on and entered a new room. Countless jewel-bright small birds fluttered about. Ron, who jumped at the sound, let out an exaggerated sigh of relief. "You nearly gave me a heart attack. I thought it was a dragon. Or a ghost." "They're not birds," Harry said. He was already looking around the rest of the chamber. "They're keys." Ron examined the heavy door and guessed aloud, "The key's going to be big. Silver. Maybe like a doorknob?" They mounted the brooms they found and, guided by Harry, already a dazzling seeker despite his age, managed to chase down a large sky-blue key. Harry snatched it, landed in front of the heavy door, fitted into the lock, and turned. Click. The door swung open. "Still not too hard," said Harry. "Come on, we're almost there." Meanwhile, Quirrell staggered into the final room. He had lost his left arm again. His right leg was badly gashed. He coughed and sneezed, each spasm racking him. "Who on earth touched my troll?" He muttered, half delirious. "Don't mind the pain. Hope is right before your eyes." Voldemort's voice, tinged with a strange excitement, whispered in his head. "Quick, go to that mirror." Quirrell looked up. In the center of the chamber stood a tall mirror, nearly reaching the ceiling. Its frame was gilded in luxurious gold, set on clawed feet. He squinted at an inscription across the top and waved a hand to steady his view. "Erised, Stra." His own reflection in the glass changed. The ruined, emaciated figure he knew gave way to someone tall and robust, cheeks flushed with health. The turban on his head was gone, thick, dark hair cascading in its place. A dark, misty phantom detached from the top of his head and drifted away. In the mirror, Quirrell held a book. The scene shifted to a quiet study, lamplight soft and the rustle of pages the only sound. He stood there, rapt and without meaning to stretched his right hand toward the smooth surface. A single strange tear slid from his eye. "Quirinus, what do you see?" The cold voice through his mind made him start and instantly sober. He was still broken, still carrying an evil upon his head, still not free. He swallowed, voice thin. "My lord, I saw myself obtain the Philosopher's Stone and give it to you. I became minister for magic under your protection." He lied, shaping a vision he knew would please the dark presence inside him. "Very good. Then where is the Philosopher's Stone?" The question cut through him like ice. Cold sweat dripped down his face. He stifled another cough and trembled, too afraid to answer. Somewhere inside that glass, the stone must exist. He could see it, but could not touch it. Time bled away. The heavy door to the chamber burst open with a crash. "I will protect the stone from you." Harry stumbled in, dust on his robes, eyes blazing with righteous fury. He saw the figure standing before the mirror. "Professor Quirrell?" he cried. Quirrell's voice was thin and surprised. "Why are you here?" 146. Philosopher's Stone in your pocket. Man in the mirror. "Professor Quirrell, why are you here?" Harry stared, stunned, at the figure before him. The man looked pathetic, trembling and small, but Harry still recognized him. This was Professor Quirrell, the stuttering, garlic-smelling defense against the dark arts teacher whose lessons were hopelessly dull. Despite his flaws, Harry had always thought Quirrell a decent sort, punctual, earnest, and the sort who had once been intimidated by Snape. If anyone here ought to be harmless, it was him. If anybody should be the villain, wasn't it Snape? Are you trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone?" Harry could not reconcile the stammering professor he knew with the idea of a mastermind. Quirrell stopped answering. Since seeing the scene in the mirror, he sometimes found himself imagining a different future. Could that vision be real? A cold, sibilant voice cut through his thoughts. It didn't come from Quirrell's moving mouth. His lips stayed still, but the words slid into Harry's ears, as if from inside his skull. "Severus certainly doesn't look like a noble fellow, flying around like a great bat. Mislead him," and the voice mocked. "Who would pay attention to a stuttering, weak Quirrell?" Harry's scar throbbed. The pain flared sharper every syllable. "It's a pity," the voice hissed. "That Quidditch match, when Dumbledore was away, I could have finished you then, but in the end, it was that old man." Harry looked at Quirrell, and the pieces fell into place. He was the culprit. But bewilderment fought through horror. Quirrell's mouth did not move, yet the words filled the air. The ache at his forehead grew until it felt like fire. "Let me see him. See this boy, who couldn't die." The words were full of contempt and hatred, threaded with a buried fear. Quirrell obeyed the unseen voice. He turned, hands trembling, and slowly began unwinding his purple turban while keeping his back to Harry. As the cloth fell away, he gazed into the mirror. Harry watched the reflection in the glass. Quirrell seeing, in its depths, a calm, well-dressed version of himself flipping through a book in a tidy study. The sight tightened something in Harry's chest, and the scar's pain drove his fingers to clench. When the turban finally slipped free, where Quirrell's skull should have been was a face as pale as chalk, skin melted and distorted as if wax had been remolded, features shriveled and ugly. The whites of the eyes were rimmed in blood, the pupils rimmed red, and the nose had been reshaped into thin, snake-like nostrils. "Harry Potter," the voice, soft as a whisper, slid close to Harry's ear now that nothing hid it. "The last time we met, you were only a baby." "Oh, you were so tiny then, so small," another voice purred, delighted. "Your father and mother, brave, but they resisted poorly." Harry's hand went to his forehead as tears, part pain, part terror, slipped down his face. Lord Voldemort," he croaked. "Yes, praise my name," came the chilling reply, followed by a crazy, merciless laugh. "Ha! Bring me the Philosopher's Stone," the voice demanded. The laughter shredded Harry's eardrums. "Go, my child Quirinus. That boy must know where the stone is." Quirrell snapped his fingers. Ropes sprang from nothing and wound themselves around Harry, pulling his arms tight to his sides. He lay bound on the cold stone floor. Quirrell lingered a moment, staring into the mirror. He sighed so faintly, Harry barely heard it, and then turned back to him. "Harry," Quirrell said in that meek stutter, "resistance is useless." Quirrell began to step toward him, probably to demand where the stone was hidden, when another voice, thin and sharp, cut the room in two. "Wait!" The command came from Voldemort. The crimson eyes fixed on the mirror, as if repelled from Quirrell by something in the glass. Harry followed the look and saw, instead of the desk and book-filled study this time, a figure in the mirror with his back to them. A young man in school robes, dark gold hair falling to his shoulders. He stood at a workbench, hands moving skillfully as he chopped and ground ingredients, then added them to a cauldron. The flames beneath it were strange, changing color and hue, sometimes streaked with mixed lights that licked the cauldron's bottom. Voldemort watched, puzzled by a flicker of familiarity he could not place. The figure in the mirror paused, then with a casual motion sent the flames back to a simple orange, and, in a clean white palm, a translucent red gem appeared, ruby bright. Voldemort's pupils shrank. "The Philosopher's Stone!" His face twitched with sudden avarice. Quirrell's body retreated, obedient and clumsy. Voldemort flattened himself closer to the mirror, greed in every hollow of his gaze as he stared at the gem. The figure in the glass casually slipped the stone into his robe pocket, as if it were no more important than a pebble. As Quirrell lay awkwardly before the mirror, Harry fought against the ropes. They were tight. He flopped back onto the floor, breathless. He would rather die than bow to Voldemort. He had to get the stone away from them, had to stall for time until Dumbledore returned and saved them all. He twisted, trying to free himself, and in doing so caught sight of the mirror's edge reflected in Quirrell's stance. The reflection showed him, the boy on the floor, also bound. Then, almost of its own accord, the ropes in the mirror dissolved. The reflected Harry rose quickly, and the panic drained from his face as a smile formed. The Harry in the mirror reached into his pocket and drew out a translucent red stone. He winked at the Harry on the floor, tucked the stone back into his pocket, and straightened. At that very instant, Harry felt a heavy, warm weight against his thigh. Something solid nestled into his own pocket, something that felt startlingly like the stone itself. A soft, distant chuckle sounded, seeming to come from deep inside the mirror. Only Voldemort and Quirrell, pressed close to the glass, heard it. In the mirror, the figure finished his work. He poured the potion from the cauldron into a small crystal vial with calm deliberation. Then, almost lazily, he spoke. "Good evening, Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts." He turned. Emerald eyes met Voldemort's, a handsome, almost mocking smile on his lips. For the first time, Voldemort understood the flicker of familiarity he had felt. He hissed the name like a curse, and a recognition mixed with fury crossed his face. "Lucien Grafton." Lucien Grafton. Seeing the face in the mirror, Lord Voldemort whispered the name. He had not expected to see that face tonight. He forced his tone smooth and cold. "Lucien, consider this our formal meeting. I am you-know-who, the Dark Lord. I trust you have heard of me." A thin smile of self-satisfaction twisted his features. He imagined the shock and submission that would follow. Instead, Lucien was calm. He set the crystal vial containing the potion down on the stand as if it were nothing. Voldemort's eyes narrowed. He had watched Lucien refine that potion using the Philosopher's Stone. Was that not why he had sought the stone, to fashion a path back to life? A year of pursuit might finally bear fruit tonight. Lucien's composure convinced Voldemort the boy would be easy to turn. Talented, not averse to the dark arts, hungry for knowledge, he needed a mentor with power and experience. "Lucien," Voldemort said, softening his voice until it dripped with temptation, "after me, you are the most outstanding student at Hogwarts. Your gift is enormous, but how much can a school truly teach you? Have you been to the restricted section? That is where real treasure lies." Lucien's gaze flickered. There were so many rare tomes in the restricted section. He had barely scratched its shelves in a year. He had wondered if he could petition Professor Dumbledore to borrow more this summer. Voldemort watched the reaction and smiled inwardly. Pull on a Ravenclaw's curiosity, and you have him hooked. Years of conversation had confirmed it. Lucien was a true seeker of knowledge and glory. Pity that old Dumbledore forbids you from learning such things, Voldemort continued, voice sharpening. Do you think he protects you? No, he is afraid a genius like you will one day outshine him, just as he opposed me. There was a seductive violence in the words, a double aim to break Lucien's defenses and to vent the old injustices he loved to rehearse. Lucien listened and almost applauded inwardly. The rhetoric was effective. No wonder Tom Riddle had once gathered followers even as a student. If he ever stopped at magic, he could have excelled at politics. Then Voldemort made his pitch plain. I will share my lifetime of knowledge with you. Give me the Philosopher's Stone, restore me to life, and when I have unlocked immortality, I will take you with me. We will share knowledge and glory. A faint sigh escaped beneath Quirrell's turban. The Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher had believed similar promises once in the Forbidden Forest. Knowledge, glory, how could a Ravenclaw refuse? Lucien's mouth twitched. The promise, the order of things. First, I am revived, then I will take you, sounded hollow. He laughed, a short, sharp sound. Ha! A man who was bested by a baby gives promises that don't quite convince me. The words came through the mirror. Voldemort's expression darkened into fury. Bested by an infant? How dare Potter? How dare that child ruin him? Fury flared in the fractured thing that had once been a soul, and Voldemort seized Quirrell's body with a violent surge. He flicked his wand. A black, mist-wreathed arrow shot from the tip of the wand toward the prone boy, aimed for the heart. But no scream followed. Quirrell choked as something leapt between the projectile and its target. A creature of light gold scales, white jade horns, eyes clear as glass. The same being that had protected the unicorn in the Forbidden Forest had burned away one of Quirrell's arms. Quirrell's head snapped up. Voldemort, too, stared at the creature. He laughed, hollow and delighted. Ha ha ha! Excellent. Very good. So that's it, Lucien. This is a surprise. He had not expected that thing from the forest to be here. Its vitality had left an impression on him. Tonight's gains were suddenly far richer than he had imagined. He turned back toward the mirror as if to resume his courtship. Lucien, with your gifts, don't waste them at Hogwarts. Come with me. His words cut off. The image in the mirror blinked. The glass went blank. Lucien was gone. The stand had vanished. The potion was gone. In a heartbeat, the entire mirror winked out. A red flash filled the space where it had been. Voldemort was not Quirrell. Their combat instincts and reaction time were not the same. He thrust his wand. A blue-purple bolt of energy leapt from the tip, colliding with a red spell in the air. Sizzle, crackle, the sound of magic striking magic tore through the hall. Nonverbal, Voldemort observed, throat rasping. His crimson eyes found Lucien, who had materialized and was trading spells with him. Heh! Nonverbal casting in first year. Very impressive. With the same casual, practiced malice he used to possess Quirrell's body, Voldemort pushed power through the teacher's hands. He shattered the spell lock for a moment, hurling out arcs of electricity, frost, and poisonous mist. Lucien met them all, dissolving and redirecting each assault with a cool, precise hand. Voldemort nodded, an appreciative curl to his lip. Not bad. Your year of defense against the dark arts was not wasted. In battle, one must be calm and respond with composure. Even as he fought, his attention flicked to the creature guarding Harry. The Forbidden Forest clash had taught him something important. That thing could prevent apparition. Here, in Hogwarts, where apparition was already impossible, he guarded more against a flank from the beast than from the boy. Still, he tried to keep speaking, to worm in his voice even while spells flew. Lucien, of all the magic you've learned, how much came from Quirrell and how much from me? You should thank me for how far you've come. Lucien's casting did not waver. He had built up a rapid series of charms and counters until the tempo slowed. He clicked a brass pocket watch in his left hand. The metal flashed, light coalesced, and a delicate revolver materialized in his grip, the cylinder loading itself with bullets. He leveled it at Quirrell's face. Evil dark wizard, Lucien spat, voice steady. How dare you impersonate my respected professor? 148, Voldemort's Wrath, Transfiguration. Lord Voldemort sneered when he saw Lucien raise a Muggle weapon. His early life among Muggles had taught him the basics of their technology, handguns, and their crude, terrifying power. He didn't bother to dodge or take cover. Instead, he wrapped himself in several layers of iron shield charms and obstacle charms. Even more powerful firearms couldn't pierce such wards. They would only waste the shooter's magic. A mocking smile curled his lips. Lucien had talent. He should be exploring the true mysteries of magic, not reverting to Muggle tricks. Voldemort intended to subdue the boy and then show him how far apart they truly were. Bang! The gunshot sounded, and almost simultaneously a chorus of illusory shattering noises filled the room. Voldemort's smile had barely spread when a cold alarm flashed through him. A moment later, a faint pain arrived, and his body erupted in a dense black mist. For an instant, the scene blurred, then glimmering light. Lucien's command triggered pure fire to flare from the little Chillin's body, instantly filling the chamber with brilliant flames. The black mist blew away and revealed Voldemort. A great portion of his left chest and abdomen was gone, the beating of his heart visible through the ragged wound. Voldemort stared at Lucien, at the revolver in his hand, at the dark muzzle. "Lucien," he said flatly, "you really can surprise people. Is this alchemy?" "No, it doesn't look like alchemy. It can penetrate and shatter magic shields instantly. Interesting." He sounded genuinely intrigued. Voldemort, who had long ago learned to live with wounds that would kill ordinary men, barely flinched. He didn't even see this as his own body. His eyes flicked to the workbench behind Lucien and the small crystal vial sitting there. Lucien, for his part, admired Voldemort's reaction. This was the Dark Lord who had almost taken Britain. His command of dark arts and survival magics was unsurpassed. Still, admiration didn't stop Lucien's hands. He fired with his free hand and cast with his wand in the other. Voldemort's grip tightened on Quirrell's flesh. The man's body withered again under the strain. Not a drop of blood fell from the ghastly wound. Voldemort's dark arts converted it into power. The cost was a sudden, enormous surge of magic, a sea of crimson gold fire, air warped by heat, spells dazzling and wild. Voldemort first tried to block the bullets with transfigured objects, but when that failed, he began to move, to dodge. He pressured Lucien relentlessly, unleashing a wider and wider variety of spells, chaining them with unnerving fluidity. It was less like a duel than a performance. Spells became notes. The Dark Lord conducted them into an elegant, ruthless symphony. Many of the charms and curses he used were unheard of. Lucien answered as best he could, deflecting, dodging, firing back. For Voldemort, combat had become a fully formed system. Spells were tools, but also constraints. He treated them like an instructor demonstrating principles. To Lucien, who had only ever been taught secondhand by Quirrell, such an unrestrained, practical lesson was a rare gift. There were no enemies here, only a teacher. "Lucien," Voldemort said, voice sharp with amusement and contempt, "you are clever. You must have realized that much of what you learned from me involves the dark arts." "Those dark arts are powerful magic," Lucien responded between spells. "People reject them because they're frightened of that power. But that pompous fool Dumbledore would never let first years touch them, would he?" Voldemort taunted, expecting to see fear. He did not. Lucien remained composed, answering with spells and with gunfire. The joy in Voldemort's tone turned barbed. "A noble wizard, yet you use Muggle weapons. Truly shameful." Lucien let the insult wash over him. It was only trash talk. He returned fire and kept casting. A few days ago, he thought, he'd seen a medal in the trophy room with a name on it. "I saw a medal in the trophy room with a name on it," he said. Voldemort mused. "Tom Riddle. Sounds rather Muggle." The name froze Voldemort. A green light crackled from his wand without hesitation. "Avada Kedavra." Lucien rolled aside to avoid the curse. The instant he moved, a black mist snaked out and snatched the crystal vial from the workbench. Lucien pointed his wand and launched spell after spell, but the mist slithered around every attack and returned the vial to Voldemort's feet. Voldemort laughed as he looked at the potion. "Lucien, you are still too young." Lucien watched, hand steady, and said, "Aren't you afraid it's poison?" "I have my ways of investigating it," Voldemort replied. "Besides, it's saturated with vitality and magic." He opened the vial, sniffed, and immediately showed a look of intoxicated pleasure. Who would go to such lengths to brew a poison with the Philosopher's Stone? Boy, you are naive. Before Lucien could act, Voldemort drained the potion in a single swallow. Lucien only raised his wand again and poured transfiguration over the workbench. The table was engulfed in a wash of changing magic. What normally would have been an instantaneous transformation slowed and thickened. Power surged through the transfiguration as it reshaped and condensed. Voldemort felt the potion working. He laughed as he watched Lucien at the table. "Lucien, I've heard you have talent for transfiguration," he said. "But you must know, transfiguration and white magic, however splendid, will always be outmatched in raw power by the dark arts. Your aptitude for those arts is evident. Haven't you tasted their appeal? Why do you still refuse the methods I teach you?" Time slid by. Voldemort spoke in an easy, taunting flow, but the potion's effects were slower than he expected. He was certain he'd seen Lucien brew that vial with the Philosopher's Stone, an unforgivable impropriety. Then, oddly, his nose cleared. Quirrell had been plagued by a stifling cold in earlier trials. Now the congestion was gone. "I made Professor Quirrell a decongestant earlier," Lucien said casually. "It still works, even if you drink it." Voldemort inspected himself, astonishment and then a dawning understanding crossing his twisted features. Brewing potions with the Philosopher's Stone, so convenient. It hastens preparations and extends their efficacy. This body won't catch a cold or be congested for a year. Rage like a black current surged from the depths of Voldemort's fragmented soul at the thought that the Philosopher's Stone had been used so casually. He opened his mouth. "You utterly but his words were cut off. A bright, mechanical chime sounded in Lucien's ears. Lucien smiled with obvious relief. Ding! Loki's Faceless annual loan has been repaid. When the glow of the transfiguration died away, Lord Voldemort's face went slack with disbelief. Where the platform had been, an adult Norwegian ridgeback now stood, an original structure forcibly reshaped and given life. The dragon's spinal ridges cut through the scorched air. Its pitch-black wings unfolded and cast a vast shadow. A faint sulfur tang rose from its white snout. Voldemort's crimson pupils narrowed. This is impossible. He had seen impressive transfigurations before, but a transfiguration of a magical creature? Wizards could not replicate a beast's magical circuits. Those circuits repelled ordinary magic, and so transfiguring true magical creatures had always been forbidden territory. Wizards who dared attempt it produced warped abominations or became monsters themselves. How could such a borderline forbidden transfiguration come from a mere little wizard? Lucien reached out and stroked the dragon's hide, a flash of triumph in his eyes. Hearing the system's prompt had only confirmed his certainty. To repay the Faceless loan from Loki, he had to master transfiguration perfectly. Building on existing knowledge, he had to pioneer new directions. His answer was magical creature transfiguration. The Great Barrier had always been the beast's magical circuits. Fixing the little unicorn circuit earlier had given him the foothold he needed. With the first step taken, the path ahead had become visible. A year of study and accumulation had let the seed of his talent sprout, take root, and finally bear fruit. "Lucien, have you forgotten my teachings? The mutual repulsion of magical circuits." Voldemort's lip curled in a cold sneer. He dismissed the ridgeback as an empty shell. Any transfigured creation, however lifelike, could not reproduce the bloodline-born circuits. Then the dragon opened its massive jaws. Instead of ordinary flames, countless illusory runes swirled and condensed inside like living things. A torrent of dragonfire, not pure flame but a dark red, carrying those fragmented runes, surged toward Voldemort like molten lava. The air seemed to be sucked dry. Wherever that breath passed, even the protective enchantments Voldemort had laid began to disintegrate. "Lucien, should I be doing something now?" Harry, free of his ropes, already burned away by the golden light, had been brought to Lucien's side. He watched the duel between Lucien and Voldemort, feeling he shouldn't intervene, but also uneasy at standing idle, so he asked. Lucien cast a few undetectable extension charms, expanding the chamber to many times its original size so the transfigured dragon could contend with Voldemort. Watching a beast fight was rather entertaining. No wonder some people aspired to be animal trainers. He glanced at Harry. The boy looked dusty from having rolled on the ground, and his glasses were askew, but otherwise he was fine. Tonight's experiment had achieved its aim. Lucien had measured his magical power and completed a magical creature transfiguration. "All right, you stay still," Lucien said. Harry straightened up. then watched as Lucien pointed his wand at him and began to cast, softly, precisely, several charms. Iron Head Charm, Pain Vanish, Protego, 2-point attraction. A point of phosphorescent light adhered to Harry's chest. With another flick, Lucien sent the other end flying straight toward Voldemort. The Dark Lord had just found an opening in the dragon. After all, it was still only a transfigured beast and lacked true cunning, and he was about to strike a killing blow. The phosphorescent sigil latched onto Voldemort's chest. Harry, Accio. At Lucien's soft command, Harry flew into the air. Crimson gold pure fire cloaked his body, warm rather than burning. Under Lucien's control, Harry struck a Superman pose and hurtled straight toward Voldemort. The fiery cloak flowed and swept behind him like a cape. Voldemort, bewildered, instinctively tried to dodge. For a moment, it looked as if Harry's fist would graze the Dark Lord's face. Then the phosphorescent sigil on Voldemort's chest flared. Harry's flight twisted unnaturally. Lucien manipulated his body into a sweeping kick that sent Voldemort sprawling. Ah! Voldemort's chest smoked. Red blisters bloomed across his exposed skin. Agony lanced through him, soul pain this time, and he screamed, momentarily unable to retaliate. Harry pressed his body against Voldemort. A soft glow radiated from him that for the Dark Lord felt like torture. The fiery cloak wrapped them both. While Harry felt nothing harmful, Voldemort tasted the burning torment of being submerged in lava. He writhed, trying to raise his wand. Bloodied. Whoosh! A blood-red flying blade shot from the tip of Lucien's wand and severed Voldemort's hand. Voldemort turned his feral eyes on Lucien. Using the magic I taught you against me? Lucien looked at him coldly. This was revenge for Selenea and the others. A sudden, cold, sinister gust cut through the furnace-like heat in the room. Voldemort hurled a curse at Quirrell's soul, igniting it to carve a fleeting chance for escape. A chilling black mist drifted out from Quirrell's head and surged toward the ceiling. Lucien made a token effort to intercept, but without destroying Voldemort's Horcruxes, he could not truly stop him. The black mist broke through a layer of pure fire, thinned, and slipped into the stone wall. Lucien strode toward Harry and Quirrell. The flames parted before him, making a path. He waved his wand to separate the two. Harry seemed to have slipped into a coma from the collision with Voldemort's soul. Quirrell's breathing grew faint and shallow. His chest rose and fell more calmly, his expression dazed and unfocused. Quirrell turned his eyes to Lucien with effort. His lips moved. Having been possessed by Voldemort, he had borne ill intent and done terrible things. It was only when the Dark Lord's soul departed that Quirrell truly woke, realizing what had been done and what choices had been forced upon him. He tried to speak, the words condensed into a single, rueful sentence. How unlucky. I shouldn't have gone into that forest in the first place. 150. Unlucky Quirrell, the magic of love. Quirrell's final ramblings left Lucien silent. He really had been an unlucky man. If Quirrell hadn't gone into the dark forest, if he hadn't met Lord Voldemort, if he hadn't been corrupted by him, he might still have been a respected Hogwarts professor, digging deeper into magic, pursuing knowledge as an outstanding Ravenclaw alumnus. But there are no ifs. A dark whirlpool gathered in Lucien's eyes as he watched the magical circuit within Quirrell's body, now utterly shattered. Quirrell's breaths were thin. Both his life force and soul were slipping away. The light in his eyes dimmed. Lucien shook his head gently and said, "Glow." At his command, a crimson gold flame wrapped Quirrell, cleansing his broken flesh and weary spirit. From the burning fire came a faint, almost unreal voice. "Thank you." It sounded like a last, grateful whisper for release. Lucien produced a phoenix tail feather from his pocket and let the pure flame touch it. In seconds, the feather turned to ash, and a burst of bright red fire flared upward. From the blaze, a tall, silver-haired wizard with a silver beard appeared beside Lucien, his bright blue eyes peering through half-moon spectacles. Dumbledore scanned the chaotic room, Harry unconscious on the floor, Ron and Hermione somewhere nearby, and a distorted, unstable dragon that made the old man's expression freeze for a heartbeat before he recovered. "Let's get Harry to the infirmary first," Dumbledore said. Lucien agreed. After a few swift arrangements, Fawkes teleported the three of them to the infirmary. When Lucien came to, he saw Madame Pomfrey in her white cap and robes, wand moving gently over a bed while she soothed a frightened student. "It's all right. Your friend took a blow to the head and fainted. He'll be fine," she murmured. "Thank you, Madame Pomfrey," Hermione replied. Ron lay on the bed with his eyes closed, while Hermione stared anxiously at the healer. At the sight of Dumbledore and the inert Harry floating beside him, Madame Pomfrey's expression changed from kind to icy. "An injured student?" she demanded, suddenly sharp. "Dumbledore, as headmaster, you should be ensuring the student's safety." "Poppy, I'm sorry, that's my fault. I'll leave Harry in your care," Dumbledore apologized. Madame Pomfrey didn't wait for instruction. She waved her wand and lowered Harry gently onto the bed beside Ron. Hermione opened her mouth as if to say something to Lucien, but Dumbledore was already guiding him out of the infirmary. Once they were a safe distance away, Dumbledore stroked his beard and sighed. "Madame Pomfrey is an excellent, conscientious healer," he said. "When she's treating patients, she insists on rules being followed. No exceptions, not even for me." Before Lucien could answer, Professor McGonagall arrived, breathless and worried. "Dumbledore, you're back at last." "I heard Longbottom say that Harry and the others went to protect the Philosopher's Stone. This is simply—" McGonagall trailed off, seeking reassurance from the headmaster. Dumbledore smiled faintly. "Harry and the others did the right thing and were very brave. Thanks to them," he glanced at Lucien, "the children did protect the stone and stopped Quirrell's plot." McGonagall's face registered shock at the name. "Quirrell? Quirrell was involved? Where are Harry and the others? Are they hurt?" she asked urgently. "Don't worry, Minerva," Dumbledore said. "Madame Pomfrey is looking after them." Still, McGonagall hurried toward the infirmary. She saw Lucien standing beside Dumbledore, but the boy looked clean and untroubled. She didn't connect him to the night's events. She nodded shortly to him and went on. Dumbledore led Lucien to the headmaster's office. The night was late. A few sparse stars shone through the windows. "Lucien, tonight must have been unforgettable," he said softly, without summoning fire or treats this time, only a steady, attentive presence. "Indeed," replied, "seeing Lord Voldemort with my own eyes was unforgettable." Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. "There are not many who would dare to call him by name." Lucien spoke calmly. "It's just a name, isn't it?" Dumbledore's expression warmed into something like approval. "Yes, just a name, but many cannot manage that. They still carry fear." "Tom," Dumbledore continued, "Lord Voldemort was once a Hogwarts student. Before all this, he was the most outstanding, most brilliant boy of his year." Lucien played along, as if learning something new. "Tom? That's Voldemort's name?" "Yes, Tom Riddle, his given name, taken from his father's surname. He hated his origins and changed his name to sever ties with his past." Dumbledore looked out at the night before going on. He was extraordinarily talented, an eloquent speaker, and he had a charisma that drew people to him, followers more than companions. He was very skilled at manipulating others, preying on their desires and fears to bend them to his will. Lucien had already known enough to piece the story together. He'd even seen a special services to the school medal in the trophy room with Tom Riddle's name on it. Dumbledore's reminiscence confirmed what Lucien had suspected. "Tom took a dark path," Dumbledore said gravely. "Lucien, thank you for your help tonight in foiling his plot." "In the end, it was Harry who defeated Quirrell, or rather, Lord Voldemort, wasn't it?" Lucien asked. He added silently to himself, "Harry did the work. I guided him." Reasonable, he thought. "Yes," Dumbledore replied. "But Harry's way of defeating him was very unusual. Mere touch caused terrible harm. Do you want to know what it was?" Lucien's curiosity showed. The appetite for understanding was familiar. Dumbledore did not hesitate. "Love," he said simply. "That was the magic at work." 151. Thestral bookmark. Absent Harry back in his dormitory, Lucien kept turning over the idea of the magic of love. Everyone at Hogwarts said that Lord Voldemort had been defeated by Harry Potter. The story of the boy who lived and the Dark Lord's fall was on everyone's lips. But the real truth, Lucien knew, was different. It was Lily Evans's sacrifice, her life, and the love she poured into protecting her son that created the enchantment shielding Harry. That protection rebounded Voldemort's killing curse. Because of it, Voldemort could not only not harm Harry, he suffered terrible backlash when he tried. Dumbledore's final words echoed in Lucien's mind. "Love is the greatest magic in this world." It has created countless miracles and birthed infinite possibilities. Lucien believed it. Voldemort had been near unstoppable at his peak. Few could have stood against him. But Lily had done it, not as a powerful witch, but as a mother protecting her child. Love was something Tom Riddle could never understand. Born, some said, from a loveless childhood, and perhaps even a love potion. How could he comprehend what a mother's love meant? Lucien sat at his desk and pulled a book from the pile. He flipped through until he reached the marked page. A dark bookmark lay between the sheets, wispy feathers sparse and ethereal. It was one of Hagrid's gifts, made from a thestral tail feather. Only those who had witnessed death could see thestrals. Lucien twirled the bookmark between his fingers. It felt cool to the touch. "I can see thestrals now, too," he murmured. Early the next morning, Lucien ate breakfast in the Great Hall. Few students were up. Most were still sleeping in. With exams over and summer vacation approaching, the castle felt lighter. This week was always the most carefree of the year. There were exceptions, of course. Wood, we want to win the Quidditch Cup for Gryffindor. Really, we do. But Harry isn't here. It's impossible without a seeker. The Weasley twins bantered, trying to soothe Oliver Wood's frustration. Exams were done, but the Quidditch finals still loomed. Wood had everyone practicing obsessively. With Harry joining the team this year, they had finally seemed within reach of the championship. The house hadn't won in years. But Harry had fallen ill at the crucial moment. "No, we still have to try our best. Squeeze every last bit out of the team," Wood insisted. Lucien, spooning red bean porridge, glanced across the hall at the twins and the captain. Oliver Wood was notoriously passionate about Quidditch, dragging players out before dawn to drill and debate tactics. He was strict with his teammates and himself. Seeing the captain's bloodshot eyes, Lucien couldn't help but pity him. After all the effort, he had found a talented seeker, only to have the chance evaporate. Wood led his players up from the Great Hall toward the Quidditch pitch. Fred and George spotted Lucien as they passed, and after a half-hearted wave, trudged off with their brooms. "Good morning, Lucien," said a voice. Lucien looked up to find Cho Chang sitting opposite him. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat high ponytail, and beads of sweat still clung to her forehead. She'd probably just finished practice. "Morning, Cho. You heading to Quidditch?" "Yep. Lucien, you seem more relaxed today," she said, studying him. He wasn't surprised. Between surviving his first year, learning so much, and finally paying off 2 burdensome annual loans, he felt lighter. He still had 1 annual loan left for the magic weaving technique, training Norbert into a Dragon King for his clan, but that project had only just begun. "Maybe exams being over and having fewer debts makes life feel easier," he replied. Cho covered her mouth and laughed softly. "You make it sound like you took out a loan to come to school. Oh, by the way, you'll be a second year next term. Have you ever thought about trying out for the Quidditch team?" Quidditch? Lucien preferred watching to playing. Coming. Cho had tried several times to recruit him before. She was very enthusiastic about it. He smiled politely. "I'll think about it next year, senior. For now, good luck with the match." Later, Lucien paid a visit to the infirmary. Ron had already woken and was enjoying his meal. Harry, however, lay still in a deep sleep. His soul had been disturbed when he came into contact with Voldemort, and he remained comatose. Lucien had no doubts about his own involvement with Harry's flying incident. He'd taken precautions, even placing an iron head charm on him. The protection had been thorough. The Quidditch finals finished during Harry's coma. Chasers and beaters could be substituted without completely undoing a team's chances, but losing a seeker was catastrophic. The snitch was worth 150 points and could end a match instantly. Without their seeker, Gryffindor's opponents could hunt the snitch unimpeded. Facing Ravenclaw, Gryffindor suffered a crushing defeat and lost the cup once more. That, however, was small news compared to what followed. The real scandal rippling through the school was about Professor Quirrell. The Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher had been caught coveting Hogwarts treasures. A dark witch or wizard had infiltrated the castle. Whispered conversations and rumors filled the corridors. "I've said it, there's something off about Quirrell. Which Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson were you even awake for?" Sigh. "Is our Defense Against the Dark Arts post cursed?" Seems like it. Not a single professor has lasted a year since I started here. The talk boiled over everywhere. Part of it came from the students' appetite for gossip, part of it from Dumbledore's subtle shaping of events. Even as a first year, Harry had been thrust into the spotlight. Dumbledore seemed intent on fostering his courage and bolstering his image. Footsteps pounded toward them, cutting Lucien's thoughts short. Ron burst in, out of breath and eager. "Lucien, I finally found you! Harry wants to see you!" Inside the infirmary, perhaps because Hermione and Ron had stopped by earlier, Madame Pomfrey finally allowed Lucien in. 5 minutes, no more. The patient still needs his rest. No problem. Thank you, madam. Lucien slipped inside. Apart from Harry, the infirmary was empty. Madame Pomfrey had already patched up the minor injuries from the Quidditch match. Harry waved at him, but remembering the nurse's warning, kept his voice low. "Ron said you wanted to talk?" Lucien produced a chocolate frog from his pocket and handed it to Harry. "For you." Harry took it without opening it right away. After a pause, he spoke, hesitantly at first, then faster as thoughts tumbled out. "Dumbledore told me a lot earlier. The Philosopher's Stone is gone, and Nicholas Flamel and his wife will eventually die. He said death is just another great adventure." Lucien listened, but his expression was guarded. The stone Flamel had given Dumbledore was no longer whole and couldn't be used to brew the elixir of life. Announcing its destruction now would make those who coveted it give up their chase. Maybe Flamel was seizing an opportunity to disappear. If one stone could be made, why not another? "The headmaster said Lord Voldemort isn't really gone," Harry went on. "He's still out there, waiting. My father, my mother, they were killed by Lord Voldemort," Harry said. His voice faltered. "It turns out I survived because of my mother's love." The last words came out choked and small. Harry looked down. The truth Dumbledore had told him was still raw. He had no memories of his parents, had grown up the unwanted child of the Dursleys. In the wizarding world, people suddenly treated him with respect and awe, a strange, dizzying change. And now he understood that much of that attention came because of his parents' sacrifice. He clasped his hands until his knuckles whitened. "Lucien, I think Dumbledore wants me to be brave enough to face Voldemort." But he stopped, remembering the night in the chamber when he had been powerless to resist. He remembered Lucien's spells, the strange transfigurations, and the way Lucien had stood against Voldemort. Lucien's calm, controlled power left a deep impression on him. "I want to be stronger. I want to learn more magic. I want the power to face Voldemort." Hearing that, Lucien's face softened into a pleased smile. He had come prepared with comforting words, but they weren't necessary. This was better. No advice could be as effective as the desire to learn coming from Harry himself. "There's a lot to learn," he said. "You already have courage. Now it's about steady study and practice. Next term, we can start proper tutoring in defense against the dark arts and practical combat. School rules mean you can't use magic outside term time, but the summer can't be wasted. When it's time, we'll go to Diagon Alley and get some preparatory texts." As Lucien outlined a detailed plan, Harry's smile stiffened. He loved the idea of practical combat training next semester, but the summer schedule, reading lists, practice plans made his stomach flutter. "I have things to handle at home over the summer," he said. "My aunt and uncle really don't want me to have anything to do with magic. So," Lucien waved a hand, "that won't be a problem. I'll go to your house during the summer and explain things. Education should be a top priority for every family," he added, as if stating the obvious. Then, as if thinking of something useful, he asked casually, "By the way, what's the name of your uncle's company?" Harry blinked at the change of subject, but nodded and told him. He had a sinking feeling his holiday was about to be very full. A few days later, the Great Hall buzzed with end-of-year excitement. Students argued over who would take this year's House Cup or daydreamed about summer plans. Green and silver streamers hung above the Slytherin table, and a massive banner bearing a coiled serpent had been unfurled behind the high table. Slytherin's table erupted with cheers and laughter. 7 years in a row, they had won the cup. "Whoa, this is amazing. All my years here in Slytherin's taken the House Cup every year now," one voice crowed. "This honor's ours," another shouted. Without Harry's help, the Lions would have had to give up even the Quidditch Cup. Quidditch pushed us past Ravenclaw this year. Ravenclaw were really tough, someone else chimed in. I heard they had a first year who scored a ton of points. Lucien sat with Ravenclaw, but he wasn't worked up about who won the cup. For houses, it was a collective thing. For individuals, it was mostly a token. Most of the Ravenclaws showed little bitterness at missing out. Over the year, he'd watched them and decided Ravenclaw might be the least united house of the four. The Eagles prized solitary study and the pursuit of knowledge, content to follow their own intellectual paths. An eagle, he thought, seldom huddles with others for warmth. A crisp sound rang as Dumbledore set down his spoon. His voice carried across the hall. Another year has passed. Before you enjoy this feast, indulge an old man's platitudes. 153. Bonus points for the ups and downs. Ravenclaw. In the Great Hall, Dumbledore rose to give his end-of-year summary. Another splendid year draws to a close, and to cap it off, let us witness the awarding of the House Cup. The scores for each house are as follows. In fourth place, Gryffindor, with 255 points. In third place, Hufflepuff, with 358 points. In second place, Ravenclaw, with 410 points. And in first place, Slytherin, with 415 points. A thunderous cheer erupted from the Slytherin table. The students pounded the benches and raised their goblets high, celebrating their 7th consecutive victory. It had been a close race. Ravenclaw was only 5 points behind. If a few points had gone one way or another, the outcome might have been different. But Slytherin still held the cup. Slytherin has performed very well, Dumbledore praised. However, he continued, several recent events must also be taken into account. The Slytherin cheer faltered. A sour uncertainty spread across their faces. Dumbledore's next words made everyone lean forward. I'm sure you've heard about the events of the past few days, and some students displayed extraordinary courage and wisdom during those incidents. Therefore, there are still some points to be awarded. Let me see. A few students from the other houses glanced toward the Gryffindor table, and tension showed on many faces. Dumbledore cleared his throat. First, Mr. Ron Weasley. He played the most brilliant game of wizard's chess Hogwarts has seen in years. For this, I award Gryffindor House 50 points. Ron's face went beet red, then scarlet, as the Gryffindor table roared its approval. Percy, puffed with pride, boasted to the other prefects, Ron's my brother, my youngest brother. He beat Professor McGonagall's chessboard. When the clapping had died down a little, Dumbledore went on. Second, Miss Hermione Granger. She calmly used logic and reason in the face of raging fire. For this, I award Gryffindor House 50 points. Hermione buried her face in her arms, unused to such loud praise. The Gryffindors loved it, bouncing and waving their wands as if to punctuate every cheer. That is 100 points so far. Third, Harry Potter. He displayed fearless daring and courage, and for this I shall award Gryffindor House another 60 points. The uproar from Gryffindor was deafening. Between Ron, Hermione, and Harry, Gryffindor had just gained 160 points. A student shouted, it's tied, and the calculation spread through the hall. 255 plus 160 equaled 415, exactly Slytherin's total. For a moment it seemed Gryffindor might wrest the cup away with just one more point. Dumbledore raised a hand for silence. There are many kinds of courage, he said. It takes daring to face our enemies, but it takes courage to stand up to our friends. Therefore, I shall award Mr. Neville Longbottom 10 points. Gryffindor's cheers reached a climax. Neville stood stunned, clutching his goblet as his classmates swarmed him with congratulations. Harry applauded politely, but didn't seem as carried away as the rest. Instead, he looked across to the Ravenclaw table. He caught Lucien's faint smile and the quiet clap Lucien gave. Harry then turned his attention back to the head table and noticed Dumbledore watching him with a small, knowing smile. Finally, Dumbledore drew the word out, and every ear in the hall strung itself taut. One student used his wisdom and magic to contend with a dark wizard, the Craw. He protected the school's treasures, aided a fellow student's development, and accomplished extraordinary feats. Therefore, I shall award him 100 points. Silence fell so sudden it felt like the hall itself was holding its breath. 100 points. If they went to any house, the House Cup would be decided beyond dispute. Dumbledore looked toward the Ravenclaw table with obvious satisfaction. I congratulate Lucien Grafton for earning these 100 points for Ravenclaw. Applause burst out, first from Gryffindor, oddly enough, and then from every table. Harry clapped with genuine pleasure. Having seen Lucien's actions firsthand, he knew how much the award was deserved. The professors at the head table also stood to applaud. Every teacher who had taught Lucien had seen his talent and hard work over the year, and even the usually stony Snape allowed himself a rare, approving smile. He often regretted that Lucien had not been sorted into Slytherin. If he had, Snape mused, Slytherin's lead might have been unassailable for years to come. Professor Flitwick was the most visibly moved. His small hands clapped so hard he had to dab at tears at the corners of his eyes. Ravenclaw rarely won the House Cup. Quidditch results, fewer students, and fewer everyday opportunities to earn points usually left them trailing. Lucien's presence and steady achievements had changed that this year. Filius, Professor McGonagall said, lifting her goblet, just as at the beginning of the year, I must congratulate you again. Ravenclaw has gained an excellent student. Professor Flitwick quickly raised his own goblet and gently clinked it in answer. Thank you, Minerva. Ravenclaw is fortunate to have Lucien. All right, the decorations here might need a little change. Dumbledore tapped his wand lightly. The green and silver of the Great Hall shifted, replaced by Ravenclaw blue and bronze. The Slytherin serpent dissolved, and from thin air a great eagle materialized. Its wings spread, and it glided over the tables. Though it was an illusion, its feathers looked distinct and real. The eagle soared toward the enchanted ceiling and vanished into the sea of stars. Dumbledore, having finished his spell, winked at Lucien and returned to the head table. Ravenclaw erupted in cheers, although their celebration was quieter than the earlier uproar from Gryffindor. There were fewer Ravenclaws, and many of them were girls, so their shouting, while sincere, was less earth-shattering. Still, the praise and excitement were unmistakable. Who would refuse an honor, after all? Oh my goodness, we actually won the House Cup this year! This is all Lucien's doing. Even aside from the 100 points, his usual bonuses were impressive. Lucien always studies so hard. He must be exhausted this year. Come here, let your senior give you a hug. Hey, what do you think you're doing? Let go of my roommate. After exchanging polite thanks and handling a few overenthusiastic classmates, Lucien slipped out of the circle with practiced ease. Congratulations, superstar, Cho called from the edge of the group, chuckling as she raised her goblet. Lucien lifted a cup from the table and clinked it against hers, and they talked briefly about plans for the summer. Heads turned at the Gryffindor and Slytherin tables. Hermione and Daphne pretended to eat while glancing toward Ravenclaw, both sharing the same thought. Lucien was proving himself dangerous, in a good way, for Ravenclaw. All three other houses offered their congratulations. Hufflepuff, as usual, cared less about the House Cup and more about the feast. The kitchen had introduced a variety of new dishes claimed to be Eastern cuisine, and the Hufflepuffs were thrilled. They'd discovered, with delight, that Lucien had taught the house elves some of those recipes. In other words, he'd essentially secured culinary perks for the Hufflepuffs. When Ravenclaw classes were combined with other houses, a number of students had received help from Lucien too, which only increased their goodwill. A few Hufflepuffs joked that if Lucien had been sorted into their house, the menus might have been even better. Slytherin, to everyone's surprise, breathed a collective sigh of relief that Ravenclaw had taken the cup. If the margin had been only a few points, they might have complained, but a difference of 100 points was unassailable. As long as Gryffindor hadn't won, they were content. Gryffindor, predictably, was in high spirits. They hadn't claimed the cup, but they had beaten Slytherin this year. Many Gryffindors raised their goblets in a salute toward the Slytherin table. Admirable opponents, but we're a bit stronger this year, some boasted. The Slytherins either snorted in disgust or fell silent, refusing to dignify the taunts. Gryffindor, used to that reaction when they'd lost, simply ate and drank all the more joyfully. By the last day of term, everyone had packed their trunks. Wardrobes suddenly looked empty. Then, the year's exam results were posted. Unsurprisingly, Lucien sat at the top of his year. Second place went to Miss Know-It-All herself, Hermione Granger, who peered at the list and murmured wistfully, "Just a little more. If I hadn't added that extra gram of burst shock powder and potions." Ignoring Hermione's mutterings, Ron excitedly shook Harry's shoulder. "Look, I'm in the top 10. Now Mum won't shout at me." "Phew, that's great. I always dreaded the day she'd lecture me about my grades." Harry, dizzy from being bounced, pulled Ron back. Yes, we're all here. And," he nodded toward the Slytherin table, "Malfoy and Greengrass are up there too." Before Ron could reply, two voices chimed behind him in unison. "Ronnie, we heard that." The Weasley twins hauled Ron away by the arms. Lucien looked over the lists, feeling quietly pleased. Not bad. Everyone had worked hard, and it showed. It felt good to let more people share in the joy of learning. Harry had already asked for summer preview work. Perhaps he should offer the same to others. The Hogwarts Express pulled out again. Lucien remembered his first trip as a wide-eyed first year full of wonder at magic. A year had passed in the blink of an eye. "I can't do any magic over the holidays?" Hermione stared out at the shrinking green countryside and sighed. Before leaving the school, they had been warned about using magic during the holidays. A trace had been placed on students' wands, an invisible charm from the ministry that monitored magical activity. Ron waved a hand and popped an every flavor bean into his mouth. "Percy says it's easy to get around. If an adult wizard is nearby, you can always explain any magic as theirs." Lucien felt that familiar pang for Muggle-born students. Purebloods and half-bloods, protected by wizarding parents, could practice over the holidays with little restriction. Muggle-borns could not. They could go to wizarding neighborhoods like Diagon Alley to avoid the ministry's watch, but few could stay there permanently, and most Muggle parents wouldn't be comfortable with the expense or the arrangement. The gap would only widen if nothing changed. "You can come to my house and use magic all you want," Ron offered cheerfully, and they exchanged contact details and home addresses so they could write by owl or meet in the holidays. The train slowed and finally came to a stop. Lucien picked up his suitcase and stepped off the Hogwarts Express. The long-anticipated summer holiday had begun. Platform 9 3/4 was its usual bustle. "Don't push, don't rush, take your time," a scrawny old guard kept saying from his pillar, letting only 2 or 3 people through at a time. He claimed it was to avoid arousing Muggle suspicion. The enchanted seam in the station could hide a handful of wizards, but a shoving mob would be impossible to conceal. Lucien waited patiently in line with his suitcase. The patch of space around the pillar had that memory charm effect. Passing Muggles glanced past without seeing the little groups of witches and wizards. Still, too many people together would ruin the illusion. Everyone around him had swapped robes for Muggle clothes, but the owls in cages remained conspicuous. 1 or 2 looked like a child's eccentric pet, but owls were the commonest wizarding animals now. Nearly half the students at Hogwarts had one. Lucien could easily picture the reaction if a dozen children suddenly pushed through carrying trunks and odd feathered birds. Putting the Hogwarts Express into a Muggle station and tucking Platform 9 3/4 into a gap was charming, when it worked. Large-scale comings and goings were awkward. A small, cool paw nudged out of his pocket. Lucien's hand closed over it, and he lowered his voice. "Wait a little longer. I'll bring you more shiny things when we get home." The Niffler, Gingy, had a knack for slipping through every crack. As it grew bolder, and this was not its first escape attempt. Lucien had learned that giving Gingy something glittering, gold chains or silver trinkets, would buy him a long nap back at his nest. It would be easier to replenish its collection once home without asking Aunt Penelope to send packages. Thanks to the unicorn's blessing that let him communicate a little with animals, Gingy understood and drew its paw back obediently. "Hey, Lucien, is that a pet?" Hermione peered at the furry paw, curiosity lighting her face. "It's a gift from a friend," Lucien said softly, still very young. They were called through then. Harry and Ron, who had moved ahead, were already waiting. Lucien recognized the Weasleys at once. Mrs. Weasley, warm and smiling, stepped forward. "Grafton, it's so good to see you. What a handsome young man you are," she said. "Please call me Lucien, Mrs. Weasley," he replied with a polite smile. "And thank you for the sweater. It's very comfortable, and it looks great." "Oh, I'm glad you like it, Lucien. Ron talks about you all the time. You simply must come visit us this summer." Mrs. Weasley's voice was sincere. Lucien accepted the invitation in his head before she finished speaking. "Ron worked hard for his results this year," she went on. Ron, beaming, had already produced a neatly folded piece of paper and thrust it at his mother. "Mum, it's all because Lucien helped me. Look at my grades. Fred and George even gave me a toilet seat to celebrate." He said the last part with the proud grin of someone who'd been set up by twins. Mrs. Weasley's face lit up at the news of his score, then froze as Ron mentioned the gift. At that moment, Fred and George swaggered through the gap, arm in arm, step boisterous as ever. Lucien smirked slightly. He hadn't expected Ron to be devious, but he'd clearly learned a thing or two from his brothers. Gingy poked his head out again, eyes fixed on a passing woman's necklace and the rings on her fingers. Lucien pressed him gently back into his pocket and sighed. The Muggle world was full of temptation, pocket watches, chains, bracelets everywhere. At school, most of the students wore little jewelry. Here, every surface flashed. No wonder a Niffler was unsettled. A small girl beside Mrs. Weasley stared at his pocket with wide brown eyes and freckles spreading across her nose. Thick, fiery red hair framed her face. Ginny Weasley blushed when Lucien made a quiet shushing gesture. She pressed her lips together and nodded conspiratorially. After a few more warm words and promises to visit, they all went their separate ways. Harry gave a soft sigh as he noticed his Uncle Vernon's flushed purple-red face and the worried, frightened shapes of Aunt Petunia and Dudley behind him. "Harry, I'm leaving first. Goodbye," Lucien said, and turned toward where Loxia was waiting for him. "Ah, goodbye," Harry called, waving. Vernon, standing close by, had clearly wanted to hurry them along, anything to avoid lingering around wizards or hearing about their year. In the end, he said nothing, deciding the argument wasn't worth the effort. Harry watched Lucien go and felt a small thrill at the thought of a summer visit, then a twinge of anxiety that his friend might see how he lived. He still didn't understand why Lucien had asked about Uncle Vernon's workplace. "Hurry up and catch up. Do you have to make us waste a whole day?" Vernon barked suddenly, and Harry sucked in a breath, pouting. A part of him hoped the summer wouldn't be dull. There would be plenty to do, and perhaps, he thought, a chance to give Dudley a fright or two. 156. Nurmengard. The summer sun beat down on Europe, but a fortress perched on a desolate mountaintop seemed to reject its light. It loomed like a tombstone, stealing warmth from the air and leaving the wind here thin and cold. A tall old man appeared silently at the gate, his silver hair and beard ruffled by the cold mountain breeze. He stood for a long moment, studying the ancient stronghold, Nurmengard. One of the most infamous prisons in the magical world, Nurmengard was unlike crowded Azkaban. It held only one prisoner, Gellert Grindelwald, the dark wizard who had stirred Europe to its core, or, by his own account, merely an idealist fighting for the rights of his kin. His followers, the Saints, had always believed they were following him toward greatness. Dumbledore passed without effort through the transparent magical barrier that guarded the fortress and walked across the cold stone toward the battered front door. His bright blue eyes glinted behind his half-moon spectacles as he read the weathered inscription above the entrance. The letters had been worn by decades of wind and rain, but he did not need to see them clearly to repeat them aloud, for the greater good. "Alas," he sighed and stepped inside. The elderly squib on duty at the door barely registered his presence and continued his silent, dutiful watch. Nurmengard's guards were a handful of old squibs, not the swarming dementors of Azkaban. Wizards were avoided on purpose. When Grindelwald had first been brought to the prison in America, he had managed, through speech alone, to turn even the best Aurors into willing martyrs. Rotation after rotation, one Auror after another had been convinced to sacrifice himself for Grindelwald. In the end, it mattered little whether squibs or Aurors were posted as sentries. If Grindelwald truly wanted to leave, dozens of elite Aurors would have been helpless. But even if he escaped, he well knew he would still have to face Albus Dumbledore. The thing that held him here was not a law, not a prison ward, and certainly not the barrier. Dumbledore climbed the spiral stairs, the air heavy with the smell of old stone and the faint dust of forgotten dreams. The door to the single cell at the tower's top stood open. Inside, a thin figure faced a narrow window. back turned. His body was the shape of a broken blade, still straighter than it looked like he could bear. Golden hair that had once shone now hung white and dull. The voice that had once swayed nations was a dry rasp. "You haven't written since Christmas," Grindelwald said without turning. "I thought you'd run out of parchment." "I was very busy," Dumbledore said, stopping in the center of the cell instead of approaching. "Now it's summer break. I have a little more time." Grindelwald's voice was flat. "It's about that boy who lived, isn't it? Yes, he needs to grow. He needs to face Voldemort." Dumbledore spoke softly, as if continuing an old habit. Grindelwald never interrupted. He only listened. "I told you about him, the Ravenclaw first year," Dumbledore continued. "He has remarkable talent, too remarkable. He might be the most outstanding student Hogwarts has ever seen. He has a magical creature for a familiar, a Qilin." Grindelwald turned then. Shadows deepened the lines on his face, but the heterochromia in his eyes was still striking. One bright blue, the other darker, an odd pair that seemed to peer into possibilities beyond the present. He had been able to glimpse fragments of the future for as long as anyone could remember, never whole visions, but enough for a man like him. "A Qilin," Dumbledore repeated, "but not like any Qilin we know." Grindelwald's interest sharpened. He had once tried to seize leadership of the magical world with a Qilin's help, only to be stopped by a kind Hufflepuff. That memory passed through him like a sigh. Dumbledore rose, walked to the small, battered wooden table, and sat. He reached for a damp cluster of sugary cockroach-shaped sweets left on the table and popped one into his mouth, crunching with unconcern. "You're still the same," Grindelwald said, smiling faintly. "You like your cheap sweets." Dumbledore waved a hand, and fresh plates of Honeyduke's confections and a pot of black tea appeared between them. "I brought these from Honeyduke's. Try them." Grindelwald, already cradling a teacup, took a lemon drop and unwrapped it slowly. For a moment the two men sat in silence, sharing what looked like a perfectly ordinary afternoon tea. "The Lord of the Qilin," Grindelwald mused. "Is the magical world about to get a new leader? A true leader?" Dumbledore stirred his tea and hesitated. He shook his head, then gave the faintest of nods. That ambiguity surprised Grindelwald. If Dumbledore himself could not be certain, the matter was larger than either of them had expected. Grindelwald's curiosity for the boy, Lucien Grafton, was piqued. "Lucien's Qilin is different," Dumbledore said. He described the creature's luminous manifestations, but held back on details about the astonishing vitality in its saliva and blood. A magical creature expert called it a mutation, a very special and very powerful mutation. Grindelwald's mouth twitched behind his teacup. Who else could that expert be, the one mentioned so casually by Dumbledore? The name hung unspoken between them. "That child is only a first year, and he's already an animagus," Dumbledore went on. "In transfiguration, he's beyond what I've ever seen. He even transfigured a magical creature," he added. "I wasn't there for the whole thing, but even my perceptions cannot be wrong. It was a full, complete recreation of the magical circuit, no mere trick. He made a real dragon." Dumbledore's words made Grindelwald's hands stop midair. If Dumbledore believed it, if Dumbledore's knowledge and judgment, which had rarely failed, confirmed such things, then the boy's feats were far beyond ordinary genius. Becoming an animagus was astonishing in itself. To transfigure magical creatures so thoroughly that a dragon could be created. Grindelwald thought of his own genius, of the rivalry and kinship he had always felt with Dumbledore, and felt, for the first time in many years, a different kind of hunger. He looked down into his teacup. The surface of the black tea trembled, and a faint, hungry light flickered in those heterochromatic eyes. 157. Grindelwald's prophecy. Crack! A crisp shattering sounded in the cell at Nurmengard. "Gellert!" Dumbledore cried out as Grindelwald suddenly crushed the teacup in his hand. Blood mingled with the tea and ran freely. He rose in a rush, crossed the small room, seized Grindelwald's injured hand to examine it, and drew out the Elder Wand. A quick healing charm bloomed from the wand's tip in a soft, pale light. Grindelwald stayed silent, his eyes squeezed shut, the lids trembling now and then. Though he didn't open them, a faint, barely suppressed smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The cut was small, something Grindelwald could have mended himself, but he let Dumbledore finish the job. "I'm fine, Al," he murmured. Dumbledore's expression sharpened as he looked at Grindelwald's closed face. "Gellert, did you use divination on Lucien?" Dumbledore knew of Grindelwald's prophetic gift. As a natural seer, one of those rare men with heterochromatic eyes, Grindelwald saw visions. What appeared to him in those visions usually pointed to events large enough to unsettle the world. Grindelwald hesitated before opening his eyes. One eye was dim with a few burst vessels, the other was bright, sparkling. "You know my gift divides into passive and active visions," he said. "Passives are triggered on their own, often about things far in the future, and they're usually more complete." Dumbledore waited. He had never heard Grindelwald say anything like this before. Grindelwald's face tightened a touch. "I did 2 divinations. The first was passive, but—" He trailed off. "I didn't see anything," Dumbledore said, frowning. "A passive vision should have shown something. That it showed nothing was troubling." Grindelwald closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them. "So I tried an active one, asked specifically about that boy, Lucien." "Tell me what you saw," Dumbledore said. Grindelwald smiled, then his tone went grave. "A vortex. Vast. Boundless." He fell silent. Dumbledore knew active visions came in shards, brief, fragmentary images. He guessed this might be all Grindelwald had seen. He guessed correctly, but not fully. Grindelwald did not add that the incompleteness wasn't accidental. The moment the vortex first appeared, a pressure of such intensity closed over his mind that his instinct was to look away. He cut the vision off himself. How many years had it been since he'd felt something like curiosity? A nearly forgotten fascination stirred in him now. "That child is extraordinary, truly intriguing." Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. "So what do you make of the prophecy?" The images were only part of a divination. Interpretation mattered as much as the sight itself. Grindelwald held Dumbledore's gaze with interest. "He will bring effects very far-reaching, effects that will touch the magical world, perhaps the whole world. I cannot tell you whether those effects will be good or bad." "You're his headmaster, Al. You're the one who knows him day to day. You must know him better than I do." Dumbledore's voice was gentle, probing. As Grindelwald asked the question, Dumbledore found himself remembering Lucien's seasons at the school, his pure and persistent hunger for knowledge, his ready kindness toward classmates, his quickness of mind and cleverness in solving problems. Above all, he remembered a night in the Forbidden Forest, how a newborn unicorn had leaned its horn against Lucien's palm. "He's a good boy, Gellert. He saved a young unicorn and received its blessing." Grindelwald's expression changed then, becoming oddly unreadable. "So he's another one who manages to befriend magical creatures?" he said, tone flat. An uncomfortable silence followed. Neither man wanted to waste the rare time they had together, and Grindelwald broke the stillness. "How do you intend to handle a boy like that? Someone so talented, frighteningly talented?" The question sent Dumbledore into a long, heavy silence. Memories rose of another prodigy he had once handled poorly. How had he dealt with Tom Riddle? Distrust, suspicion, harshness. Dumbledore saw again the night he'd gone to the orphanage to fetch Tom for school, the anger at some of the things that child had done. He could still feel the regret. A magical blaze had been unleashed around Tom's wardrobe, not enough to destroy the boy's belongings, but fierce enough to stoke a terrible ambition in the boy's heart. Sometimes Dumbledore wondered if a gentler, more understanding approach would have made a difference. He looked across the small cell at Grindelwald. The old bitterness settled deeper. "Lucien is a good child," he said finally. "This time I will not fail him." They talked on, of weighty matters like a ministry in Eastern Europe fracturing into a dozen splinter governments, and of trifling ones like the school's toilet seats being borrowed by mischievous pupils, until the afterglow of sunset had faded. Dumbledore rose slowly to leave. As he reached the doorway, Grindelwald leaned forward and whispered, "I'd very much like to meet the boy, Lucien. It would be entertaining. Life in here grows so dull." He added, almost as an afterthought, "And send me some parchment next visit. I'm out." 158. Harry's Distress, a Respectable Way. Harry lay on his bed, restless. He had only just gotten home, and Uncle Vernon had locked away all his magic things, books, wands, cauldrons, brooms, into the cupboard under the stairs. For that he was at least grateful. He hadn't been shoved back inside the cupboard himself. Thinking of the years he'd spent there with dust and spiders made him miss Hogwarts even more. He had been home for only a day, and already he felt on the edge of his patience. Hogwarts, the castle, the talking paintings, the ghosts, the interesting lessons, the friends. Hoo-hoo. Hearing Hedwig hoot, Harry turned toward the bird in its cage. Poor Hedwig. Vernon won't even let you out of the room. The thought weighed on him. If Hedwig couldn't go out, how could he write to his friends? A soft knock on the front door cut through his worries. For a moment, Harry couldn't tell who it might be. His uncle would bang on doors and shout. Dudley wouldn't bother knocking at all. Aunt Petunia, well, she never knocked twice. Another light knock. Definitely not Petunia. Harry scrambled out of bed, pushed on his glasses, and opened the door. A young woman in a black and white uniform stood on the step. She spoke gently. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Harry Potter?" Harry nodded without thinking. "Young Master Lucien is downstairs. He asked me to find you. There's something he wants to discuss." At the name Lucien, Harry's spirits lifted. He didn't hear the young master part so much as the promise of someone to talk to. "Thank you," he blurted and ran down the stairs. He stopped short in the living room. Lucien sat alone in the middle of the long sofa, poised and composed, as if he were a guest listening to a report. Opposite him, Uncle Vernon sat with the most absurdly obsequious smile, clutching a handkerchief and dabbing at his forehead every few sentences. Aunt Petunia and Dudley were wedged onto the smallest settee, looking cramped and uncomfortable. It was a scene Harry had never seen. Vernon, usually blustering and bossy, reduced to fawning and nervous attentiveness. Lucien saw him and waved. "Good afternoon, Harry." Harry sat down beside him and listened in a daze as Lucien spoke and Vernon nodded. "Harry has just begun his magical education," Lucien said. "This is a stage where he needs a solid foundation." Hearing the word magic made Harry's heart skip. He glanced at Vernon, expecting an explosion. Vernon hated anything to do with wizards. Vernon's fat face twitched with instinctive disgust, but then, astonishingly, he picked up his handkerchief and dabbed his cheek, answering, "Yes, of course. Studying is very important. Harry must study hard. Yes, study hard." Vernon was using honorifics. He was strangely deferential. Lucien continued calmly. "Things like diet and rest are also essential. Those are necessary to a child's healthy growth." Yes, his diet," Vernon stammered. Lucien looked at Dudley, whose roundness at that moment made him resemble a fat penguin chick, and then at Harry, who, despite a year at Hogwarts, still had the pale, slightly scrawny look of someone who had not always been well fed. It was clear Harry had been poorly looked after at his aunt and uncle's. The Dursleys' attitude toward him had always been contradictory. The frightened child of their hated sister, something to be kept but also to be snubbed, a reminder of a world they feared. They had raised him, and they had mistreated him. Because of the protective magic his mother had left him, Harry had to remain with blood relatives. The spell needed a family bond. Lucien could see how tangled love and resentment had become. "He should receive the same meal treatment as his cousin Dudley," Lucien said. "After all, Mr. Dursley's salary is enough, isn't it?" Vernon agreed, now visibly relieved. Dudley opened his mouth as if to protest, but Petunia quickly covered it and shushed him. Lucien asked about Harry's room. Vernon and Petunia let out quiet sighs of relief. Last year, Harry had been moved from the cupboard under the stairs, after a threat from a very tall, very intimidating man, into Dudley's old toy room. They went on to discuss Harry's education in practical terms, and Vernon solemnly promised to give Harry free time to study. Lucien politely declined Vernon's offer of dinner, and with a small nod, left number 4 Privet Drive with someone called Norris. Harry jogged after them onto the path. Lucien paused and turned toward him. "Lucien," Harry began, then hesitated, unsure how to say what he meant. "Do you know where I can exchange galleons into Muggle money? I want to change some." Lucien blinked at the odd question, then guessed why. Harry hurried on, words tumbling out. "If possible, I want to give it to my aunt and uncle. I didn't know before that Mum and Dad left me so many galleons. Raising a child costs money, right? Uncle's always complained about it, but I want to. Pay them, at least some." Lucien thought, of course. Harry wanted, in his kind way, to repay them financially for the years he'd spent under their roof, having nothing in return. "No problem," Lucien said. "That's easily arranged." Harry thanked him and then asked the question that had been bothering him the whole time. How did you get Uncle Vernon to be so respectful toward you? Lucien smiled faintly. By becoming a shareholder in your uncle's company. Inside the gourd space, Lucien Grafton stood by the edge and watched the huge shape pacing the clearing. Norbert. In just 2 or 3 months, the dragon had already grown to almost 4 meters from snout to tail, sleek and powerful, his tail thick and long. Norbert would spread his wings now and then, throwing a vast shadow with a wingspan of 6 or 7 meters. He was already capable of flight. The cramped space felt too small. The dragon was growing too fast, and the enclosure would have to be expanded. Lucien felt a prickle of worry. His current command of the undetectable extension charm was close to its limit. When he went to Arizona with Newt, he would ask for advice. If it involved Scamander family methods, that might be complicated, but perhaps Newt could help expand the space. What sort of repayment would be appropriate? A low growl rolled over his head, threaded with an odd, that possessive softness. Lucien looked up and realized he was standing in Norbert's shadow. The dragon's eyes burned orange-red like molten lava, and Lucien couldn't help smiling. He knew the posture wasn't menace so much as needy clumsiness. The roar sounded deep and fearsome because the young dragon couldn't contain his hunger. No matter how docile a dragon acted, it was still a top predator of the magical world there, and Lucien, blessed by the unicorn, understood perfectly what Norbert was trying to say. I'm hungry. Have you forgotten your manners? Call me Daddy, Lucien teased, shaking his head. He produced various cuts of beef and lamb and an assortment of seafood. Norwegian ridgebacks were one of the few dragon species that hunted aquatic prey. There were even accounts of one snatching a whale calf. He fed Norbert and watched him eat. Norbert's scales were mostly deep black, threaded with darker gold patterns that shimmered and seemed to flow along his back, neck, and wing membranes as he breathed and flexed. Lucien had compared the markings in books and asked Newt. Norwegian ridgebacks did not normally display such golden flowing lines. The change likely came from hatching the egg with pure fire. Other peculiarities might emerge as Norbert matured. It was a pity Norbert couldn't use the pet growth loan from the system. Apparently, only creatures produced by it qualified. Perhaps potions could achieve similar effects, accelerate growth or improve physique. To repay the magic weaving technique loan and to raise Norbert into a Norwegian ridgeback of legend, the stronger he became, the better. Lucien summoned the system to check for available loans. His thoughts skimmed over the options like a current. Then he brightened. Loan, bone and blood baptism fluid, monthly loan. Repayment period, 30 days. Loan content, a potion. Immersion strengthens bones and muscles. P.S. Only suitable for magical creatures. Human bodies are too fragile to withstand its potency. Perfect. It didn't matter that humans couldn't use it. Norbert was in a rapid growth phase, and such a potion would be most effective now. Once he reached adulthood and his body set, the benefits would be far less noticeable. If Norbert's strength increased, Lucien could try slight adjustments to his magical circuitry via the magic weaving technique. Nothing that changed the dragon's essence, but optimizations that added up. He had already asked the system if that was feasible. The host's idea is brilliant. This is cultivation, provided the dragon's essence is not altered. That reassured him. The system also displayed the loan task. Loan task: dance with a thunderbird for 100 kilometers without relying on external objects. Wands may be used. A daunting task. Wizards couldn't fly without aids like brooms, and thunderbirds were formidable, XXXX-class creatures that could whip up storms and summon lightning, notoriously sensitive and wary of outsiders. Thunderbirds rarely tolerated close approaches. But Lucien had advantages. The animal affinity granted by the Lord of the Keelan, combined with the unicorn's blessing, made his rapport with magical creatures exceptional. It was only a matter of flying alongside a thunderbird, not stealing feathers. That should be manageable. As for unaided flight, besides the rare and dangerous magic practiced by Voldemort, one would normally need to be an animagus to take a flying form. Lucien was already an animagus and could change at will. The problem was speed. No ordinary bird could stay with a thunderbird that sailed through storms. Flying 100 kilometers at high speed without tiring was a severe test. He'd had a recent insight in transfiguration. Since his animagus form had no restrictions, could he attempt transformations beyond mundane animals? Directly becoming a magical creature would risk reshaping his magical circuitry, but perhaps changes at the level of flesh and bone, similar to a chimera-like transformation, might be possible. It was something to explore. At least the practical issue was settled. He and Newt were going to Arizona. They might as well attempt the task together. Lucien appeared on a small hillside in Dorset by Pure Fire's apparition and knocked on the wooden door of a modest house. A voice from inside called, "Just a moment." The door opened to reveal an elderly woman with bright gem-like eyes that still sparkled with startling intensity, like those of a fire salamander. She smiled kindly when she saw Lucien and the Pure Fire beside him. "Lucien Grafton, is it?" "Newt has spoken of you many times," she said. "Come in. Newt said you'd be coming, but not this soon. Have you eaten?" "I have, thank you, Miss Tina," he replied with a bow. This was Tina Goldstein, who had served as an auror for the Magical Congress of the United States in her youth, famous for her role in capturing Grindelwald. Lucien followed her inside. Though the cottage looked small from the outside, its interior was surprisingly roomy. Newt had applied the undetectable extension charm thoroughly. "Lucien, you keep in touch with Newt by letter. Thank you for that. He spends too much time with the creatures and not people," Tina said, amusement warming her voice. She listened eagerly as Lucien spoke about Newt, and her smile widened. Newt rarely wrote, and when he did, it was usually to his old friend Dumbledore, which worried her that Dumbledore might draw him into daring exploits. She was glad he had a human friend like Lucien who could balance him. A creak sounded as a trapdoor opened and Newt Scamander emerged, curly hair tousled as ever. He waved at Lucien and offered a small, reserved smile. He sat down on the sofa with an economy of motion typical of his anxious manner. Lucien understood. Newt's quietness was not rudeness, only a different temperament. They wasted no time. Tina produced a box of flu powder, and Newt explained travel arrangements. The flu network was the easiest way to travel long distances when you could call the node by name, instantaneous and reliable. Portkeys would be more convenient for a group, but Newt had been prohibited from using them. When Newt traveled the world, he drew attention. He always traveled with a veritable entourage of magical creatures, and authorities feared they might be smuggled. Newt always notified the Magical Congress where he was going and completed all required permits. Cross-country apparition with Pure Fire was also treated as potentially smuggling, so official procedures had to be followed. Entering a Thunderbird sanctuary was especially difficult. Thunderbird feathers and eggs were prized, and poachers were active. It was breeding season, and applications were tightly controlled. But who would suspect Newt Scamander of wrongdoing? He had devoted his life to protecting magical creatures. Still, official paperwork was mandatory. "Lucien, say the place name exactly as I tell it," Newt said, careful. "Otherwise, you'll end up somewhere else." Green flames licked around Newt, and then he vanished. Tina handed Lucien a pinch of flu powder, and he stepped into the hearth. "Goodbye, Tina," he called. "Have a safe trip," she answered. With a whoosh, Lucien felt the fireplace swallow him, and after a few transfers, he saw Newt again. They arrived in a small town of yellowed earth and low buildings. "This is Stormwind Town," Newt said, "the closest settlement to the Thunderbird Sanctuary." Lucien looked around. The town was small and populated entirely by witches and wizards. No muggles had any reason to be here. The Thunderbird Sanctuary and a few other creature habitats were nearby, and the town had grown up to collect and process materials produced by the creatures. Over the years, collection, processing, and trade had become organized, and more wizards settled here. It reminded Lucien a little of Hogsmeade, a pure wizarding settlement with its own rhythms and specialties. He wondered if there were local goods worth bringing home. Newt led him to his residence in town, a property given to him by the Magical Congress of the United States as thanks for his lifelong work. Newt owned many homes around the world, some purchased, some gifted, all near habitats of magical creatures. Government-gifted houses were tokens of gratitude. The ones Newt bought himself were evidence that he had never been short of coin. Lucien lingered by the window, watching storm clouds gathering in the distance. The sky was already beginning to roil. The Thunderbird country lay ahead, and with it, a test, a potion, and the possibility of shaping both Norbert's future and his own understanding of transformation. 160. Poachers, depart for Ptarmigan Sanctuary, Stormtown. Look, look, fresh Thunderbird feathers, pulled from the nest no more than 3 hours ago. Thunderbird bones, excellent for potion alchemy, can be ground into powder and taken as a tonic. Heh, guaranteed to make you feel 18 again. Thunderbird eyeballs, can see into the heart of evil. It was early morning. Many shops were still closed, but a number of hawkers were already setting up stalls or pushing carts, shouting their wares. Because the Thunderbird Sanctuary was nearby, nearly everything for sale claimed to be Thunderbird-related. Lucien and Newt had risen early to stroll the market before setting off. Lucien needed only a few glances to tell most of it was counterfeit. With a quick use of the eye of peering magic, he detected traces of enchantment, or the lack of them. The piles of Thunderbird materials were nearly devoid of genuine magic. A few more conscientious vendors had added some simple spells or soaked ordinary materials in potions to make them seem magical, but even those were fake. At least they'd tried. If all this were genuine, the sanctuary would be pointless. Lucien scanned the market further and judged that the closed storefronts farther down the lane were the legitimate sellers, licensed purveyors of Thunderbird goods. The shouting peddlers clustered near the path were clearly out to fleece tourists. He suppressed a smile. Some visiting wizards might be buying souvenirs, some might have been taken in. Lucien, don't buy anything here, Newt murmured. If you want Thunderbird materials, I know people whose quality is better. Lucien nodded. I understand, Mr. Newt. They only looked around briefly before making for the Thunderbird Sanctuary. Not far from them, a burly blond man had been watching Newt and Newt's companion for several minutes. Pretending to browse, he drifted toward the other end of the market, cut through an alley, and slipped into a run-down tavern. He greeted the owner and ducked into a back room. 7 or 8 people sat inside, all with the wary, practical air of adventurers. The most striking thing on the table, however, was a black widow spider whose abdominal red markings formed an unmistakable pattern, red lips instead of the usual hourglass. Boss, guess who I just saw at the market, the blonde said, nodding toward the door as he took a seat. The man in the center, the boss, was brown-haired and casually dressed for travel. His hair, however, was neatly combed. He barely glanced up from his glass of brandy as he spoke. Newt Scamander, the most famous magical creatures expert. Aiden, your news is slow, another voice muttered. Aiden, the blonde, smiled awkwardly and sat. Boss, should we postpone? He's an old hand. He was active in that era, faced Grindelwald himself. Newt's experience in combat is significant, and his case is always full of magical beasts. I heard 10 years ago in Egypt, Newt dealt with a gang of poachers at a magical creature sanctuary. 27 of them were handled by him and the beasts in his case. The brown-haired man's tone was flat, but carried weight. Some faces in the room tightened at the reminder. Aiden pushed on, trying to persuade. But this is also an opportunity. Newt's case is priceless, enough for us to retire. The leader swirled the brandy in his glass and did not hurry himself. His calm words swayed a few doubtful men, but voices were cautious. Aiden, who prided himself on reading a situation, glanced around and realized the company's resolve had hardened. He fell quiet and began to tally possible escape routes in his head. The brown-haired man drained his glass, looked down at the spider on the table, and laughed softly. Besides, we have the best assassin. Who would pay any mind to a common spider? Who would think it's a wizard in disguise? Am I right, Shirley? He added. The spider, Shirley, lifted a leg in answer, an almost languid motion that was perfectly attentive. Thunderbird Sanctuary entrance. Mr. Scamander, we've been expecting you. A tall, middle-aged man in a short robe greeted them with a warm smile. Stanley, long time no see, Newt replied, then introduced Lucien. Stanley Jones, Dean of Ilvermorny's Thunderbird Academy, potions professor, and an expert on Thunderbirds. He'll be our guide for the trip. Oh, in that company. How dare I claim expertise, Stanley replied modestly, then turned his attention to Lucien. It was the first time he'd seen Newt bring a younger companion. And this is? Lucien Grafton, my junior from Hogwarts, Newt said. He's shown a talent for magical creatures. I brought him along for the summer to see the Thunderbirds. Stanley's face showed nothing at first, then surprise briefly lit his features. Praised by Newt as talented in magical creatures? That was notable. "Hello, Mr. Jones," Lucien said politely. Stanley laughed openly and clasped Lucien's hand. "Hello, hello, a fine young wizard from Hogwarts. Truly admirable." Lucien returned the handshake without fuss. Newt had already given him a quick introduction to Ilvermorny on the way. The American School of Magic, comparable to Hogwarts, divided into 4 houses: Thunderbird, Horned Serpent, Pookwiggy, and Wampus. Stanley Jones, as Dean of the Thunderbird House, was also a potions master and a well-liked host. Lucien observed both men. Both were house deans and potions professors, and yet their social styles could not have been more different. He suppressed a smile and filed the thought away as the party prepared to enter the sanctuary.